What's up guys, I hope you're feeling good today. In this video, I want to give you my best advice and top tips for achieving peak performance. Because in today's day and age, there's more stress, higher expectation, and more distraction on us than ever, but we still are expected to achieve peak performance more often and for longer. So before we get into it, I want to quickly introduce myself. So my name is Doug, I'm 36 years old. I've been an online personal trainer and a nutritionist for the last 5 years. And in that time, I've been helping over 100 men, including multimillionaires, CEOs of global companies, to achieve peak performance, to feel their best, to live more fulfilled lives, to get healthier, to get happier, to lose fat, to build muscle, you name it. I've seen it, we've been there. So let's get straight into it. I think the first thing we need to do is actually define what peak performance is. And when I think of peak performance, a few kind of words spring to mind, and I'd be interested to know what words spring to your mind when you think of peak performance. But for me, it's focus, it's concentration, it's cognitive function, it's speed and duration, the ability to go far and the ability to go fast, and the ability to do it all feeling good. It's also the ability to get through procrastination, to feel more confident, to get more done. And I think to do all of those things, to me, in my head, that is kind of what embodies and defines peak performance. But like I say, comment below, let me know what you define peak performance as, because I'd love to know. So how do we actually go about achieving that state? Because let's be real, peak performance is a state. We can't be at peak performance levels all the time, 24/7, 365 days a year. But we want to be able to achieve that rate, that performance, that sort of state at the right time and for the right duration. Me doing these videos is a good example, right? Obviously, when I come on to do these videos, I want to be able to give you guys my best. I want to be able to give you value. I want to be able to be high energy. I have to prime myself. I have to get myself into this state so that I am performing at my best for you guys. So how do we do this? Well, listen, it's obviously a combination of things. It's a combination of the mental game, but it's also a combination of the physical game. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through a load of things I've written down. If you think I've missed anything, if you disagree with anything, I'm always open to constructive criticism. I don't think there is a defined right way to go about peak performance. I think it's one of those things where you have to find what works for you. But let's delve into what I think the sort of main needle movers, the main drivers are for peak performance, and then we can go from there. Number one, first and foremost, almost without a shadow of a doubt, and I'm sure most of us can agree on this one, has to be our sleep. Both our sleep quantity, how much we're sleeping, and our sleep quality, how well we're sleeping. And there's several things that I think a lot of people can do that you can do literally like today that are gonna improve both. So I've invented something called the 3-2-1 rule, okay? It's very straightforward, and I said everybody can do it. Basically, for 3 hours before you go to bed, you don't eat. For 2 hours before you go to bed, you don't drink anything. Water, coffee, alcohol, fizzy drinks, whatever it is. And 1 hour before you go to bed, and this is the hardest one, guys, you try to come off of all the screens, off of the phones, the laptops, the iPads, the TVs, all of these things that we just naturally get attuned into in the evening time, right? They're quick, cheap dopamine hits that enable us to supposedly relax. What we don't realize is that at a subconscious level, these devices are actually both stressing us out, raising our cortisol levels, triggering us, but they're also flooding us with blue light, which is preventing the production of melatonin, which is effectively, to really dumb it down, it's your sleep hormone. And it just slows the production of that. So then that's the number one thing you could do to improve your sleep quality. That's not going to necessarily help you to get to sleep, but it's hopefully going to help you to stay asleep. Because if you think about it this way, right? When you eat, digestion is a metabolic process. Any metabolic process is a process that raises your heart rate. And if you want to achieve good quality sleep, you need to be at a resting heart rate level, right? So you need time for your body to digest that food. Now, 3 hours might not be enough, but it's going to give you the best possible chance. I'm not one of these people who suggests you finish your meal at 5 p.m. I think that's what Brian Johnson, the guy who's trying to live forever, but actually just ends up like looking like a 65-year-old now, is trying to do. Now, I do agree with him in the sense that you should be starting to eat and finishing to eat earlier in the day if you want to achieve peak performance. But I think 5 p.m. is a little bit of a stretch unless you're like a 12-year-old, which you're probably not watching this. But if you can finish eating 3 hours before you go to bed, that's definitely going to help. Drinking water, obviously, I certainly found as I went into my 30s, I was waking up more in the night. You know, your bladder shrinks, it gets more sensitive. and your ability to sort of empty your bladder as well just is not as good as it was when you were growing up. So if you minimize the amount of water you drink a couple of hours before you go to bed, you're going to minimize the possibility that you're going to wake up in the night and you're going to get knocked out of, deep restorative sleep. So that's kind of the justification for the 3-2-1 rule. And then other quick tips that you can do: try to go to bed and wake up at the same time. Sleep regularity is super important. Try to obviously have a dark room with blackout blinds or shutters, which is great. I live in Europe and we get that quite a lot. Everyone's got shutters here, which is awesome. Try to have your room well ventilated. One mistake I see a lot of people make is they shut their bedroom door. And if you think about it, it sort of prevents or it restricts the amount of fresh oxygen that can get pumped through. Now, obviously, the way around that, if you can, is to slightly open your window, but then that could potentially make it louder or make it lighter. So the easiest solution is to just open your bedroom door, and then at least if you live in an apartment or a house, you've got more air, more oxygen to sort of be able to flow around a little bit. And the last thing is, I'm just trying to think if I missed anything. Oh yeah, of course, is to have a cool room as well, as cool as you can. So yeah, really try and cool it down before you go to bed. So that's sleep, guys. That's number one. Number two, again, probably not a massive surprise, exercise. I'm not going to go deep into the roots of this because I think we all know roughly what we need to be doing, but a nice mix of resistance training and some kind of cardiovascular. It doesn't need to be high intensity, but regularly getting outside, going for walks, getting your steps up is going to massively help. Consistency with that, I think, is massively important. Progressively overloading, which basically means whether it's running, rowing, lifting weights, just trying to do a little bit more every time, whether that's go a little bit further, a little bit faster, lift a little bit heavier, whatever it might be, pushing yourself out of the comfort zone. So it's the physical benefit, but also the mental benefit. And then a couple on the sort of nutrition side of things. We've got 4 for you on the nutrition side of things. First of all is carbohydrate timing. Now, carbs are great. I actually did a video very recently about why carbohydrates are so valuable to us. But if you're trying to achieve peak performance, you might want to think about the timing of your carbohydrates, because a lot of people, including myself, are very sensitive to what we call carb crashes, which is where you have a big, bunch of carbohydrates and then effectively you crash. And this is to do with your blood sugar levels. Your insulin levels rise as you absorb carbohydrates because insulin is a transportation hormone. It takes the fuel, the energy to the cells where it's needed effectively. So your blood sugar, your insulin level spikes after you've eaten carbohydrates, and then after it's sort of transported the nutrients, the carbohydrates to the cells where it needs it, it comes back down. And when it comes back down is when you start to feel that spike, that crash. And that can really harm people. So for me, it's always around lunchtime, right? I don't know if it's a genetic disposition. I've never really looked that much into it. I just know that for me, it's always around lunchtime. Let me know if you have carb crashes and when you have them. So if you experience them like I do, probably the best thing to do is to have a light carb meal during the day so that you don't experience those crashes, and then potentially have higher carbs in the evening, which actually, if you have a crash, it's potentially going to help you get to sleep as well. So there's double benefit there. But as I say, this is different for everybody. So don't take this as just like red, as like black and white. Think about it in the context of how you feel when you have carbohydrates and your sensitivity. And whatever you do, don't see this as me demonizing carbohydrates, because it's absolutely not. Next up is processed food. Processed food, you have to remember, it's not sort of quote unquote natural. It's not necessarily what our body wants. So to try and limit the amount of processed food that you have, again, this seems really obvious. I appreciate that. I'm not telling you anything you necessarily haven't heard before, but it's about doing this in combination. That's a really important thing. But trying to limit the amount of processed food is going to massively affect your cognitive function. And if we're trying to achieve peak performance, that's massively important. The other next one on food is that one, again, that I think people don't necessarily understand, or maybe they've heard it, but they don't understand the link as to the how and the why, is making sure that you're getting enough dietary fat. So you have 3 macronutrients: you have your protein, you have carbohydrates, and you have your fat. Personally, I think it's the most terribly named macronutrient in the world, because people obviously associate dietary fat with body fat. And I can understand the link because of the name, and also it's the most calorie dense of the 3 macronutrients. Protein and carbohydrates, for every 1 gram of those, it's 4 calories. For every 1 gram of dietary fat, it's 9 calories. So it is more dense, but it also happens to, for the most part, be more nutrient dense as well. And where fat really can help you, dietary fat, is with your endocrine system. This is your hormonal system. So it's very good at helping to keep your hormonal health in check. And if you imagine your hormones, we're not just talking about estrogen and testosterone here, we're not just talking about the sex hormones, we're talking about everything. We're talking about your hunger hormones, we're talking about your stress hormones, we're talking about the ability to wake up, go to bed, all that sort of regulatory hormones and stuff like that as well. So dietary fat's really going to help to keep all of that system in check, healthy and happy, which if you're trying to achieve peak performance and focus and concentration, all those words we said earlier, which we kind of use to define peak performance, is going to be super, super important. And the last one on the nutrition side of things, which again, I don't think there's enough understanding between the how and the why, is water. Staying incredibly well hydrated. Your brain, guys, is so smart. And as soon as you start to feel dehydrated, it actually senses that very quickly. Your brain is like a lot of sensors, basically. That's one way of thinking about it. And it senses dehydration. It senses it a lot earlier than you might think. If I say to people like, how dehydrated do you think you have to be for your brain to start sort of switching off? People are like, and I say, give me a percentage number. Think about it right now. How dehydrated do you think you have to be? People give me 20%, 50%, 70%. It's more like 2 to 3%. You really don't have to be that dehydrated for your brain to start slowly, not obviously quickly, slowly start just tuning things down, dialing things down, switching things off. And that's why one of the biggest things I see is people feel very lethargic. They feel lazy. They've lost their drive. Only in the short term, in the acute, we're talking here. And a lot of that comes down to how hydrated they are, guys. So you hear the drink 2 liters of water a day. I push that further. If you want to achieve peak performance, aim for 3 to 4. The other reason I say that is if I tell you to aim for 3 to 4 and you hit 2, but really at the moment you're hitting 1, we've just doubled your water intake. So there's a little bit of a psychological gamesmanship there as well, but hopefully you can appreciate that. And honestly, if you can achieve 3 to 4 liters of water per day, that's going to have a huge effect. And it's such an easy, free, I'm not even going to say cheap, because ultimately you can drink tap water. And I know there's lots of potential pseudoscience around the potential harm that tap water can do. And I think in 5-10 years time, there's probably going to be a lot better science around this. But for now, honestly, that's going to make like a 1 to 2% difference. What's going to make the 98% difference is just getting more water in you, hydrogen and oxygen. You have to remember that oxygen is required for the contraction of a muscle. And we're not just talking biceps and triceps here, guys. We're talking your heart, your brain, your lungs, your liver, your pancreas, your digestive system, absolutely everything. It just regulates and helps keep everything going. So that is the importance of water, guys. The other side, actually, sorry, I have one more from a nutrition side, which I put them in the wrong order, is stimulants. So the 3 that I sort of think of are caffeine, nicotine, and alcohol. Now, I think the advice here, again, because there is no sort of one-stop shop answer for everybody, because everybody has different tolerance levels, different exposure levels. Some people don't do them at all, some people do them a lot. But just being mindful of these stimulants and using them sparingly. Now, obviously, alcohol, if you're trying to achieve peak performance, is just a no-go, because that's not going to help you, right? Unless I suppose you define peak performance as like having the confidence to talk to girls or something like that, then fair play, then alcohol would be. But caffeine and nicotine, I think, use them sparingly. Like, I'm one of those people where, like, I believe too much of any good thing becomes a bad thing. So like caffeine and nicotine, for example, I've never taken nicotine in my life, never smoked, never taken the nicotine gum. I am quite tempted to try some of these, I've forgotten the name of them now, starts with a Z. Someone's screaming at the screen. Leave a comment, let me know what it's called. I've forgotten, can't remember. But I'm quite tempted to try it. I've heard it can be pretty intense. But caffeine, obviously, had plenty of experience with that. I'm actually not drinking caffeine at all at the moment. It's been about 8-9 days for me now, and I'm kind of monitoring to see how I feel. And the biggest impact it's had is 100% been when I sleep quality. Again, not my quantity, but I'm definitely able to, I wake up and I feel better rested. And that enables me to perform better in the day. But I feel like I'm not necessarily saying you need to cut caffeine out. Again, it's about finding what's right for you and just remembering that too much of any good thing becomes a bad thing. I think that's the most important thing to think about here. Same with nicotine and alcohol, obviously. I appreciate it's a depressant. You think it slows you down, but in the short term, it is actually a stimulant. But like, main reason for that, honestly, at a very basic level, is because most alcohol contains a lot of carbohydrates. So you're getting a spike of energy. And then that energy has nowhere to go. So then obviously if you're binge drinking, it's going to become a depressant, it's going to slow you down. But if alcohol in the short term, it's going to give you more energy. So it is technically in the acute, I would class it as a stimulant. Now, obviously, it's not going to help you achieve peak performance, as I said, though. So that's kind of the nutrition side of things. So plenty to get stuck into there. Obviously, we talked about sleep, we talked about exercise and movement. And then on the sort of mindset side of things, there's a few things that I want to touch on here. First of all is, I kind of touched on it with the exercise, but just doing hard things. For you to achieve peak performance, or let's put it this way, your peak performance may be higher or lower than what I would consider peak performance. You at an average Tuesday might be me at my absolute best, or vice versa, right? So peak performance is relative to you. But if you want to not just achieve peak performance, but actually raise your level of peak performance, then you constantly want to be putting your body and your brain out of its comfort zone. You want to be doing hard things. You want to be building up a higher tolerance of stress and of work capacity, so that coming into the future, you are able to reach a higher level of peak performance, that you're actually able to do more. And so that when you looked at your peak performance from 6 months ago, you're like, well, that's just like me on a normal day now. So now that's my baseline now. So for me to achieve a 3-hour window of peak performance, that is like a whole new level. It's 10x where I was 6 months ago, and it's 100x where I was 2 years ago. And I think the real route to that is just constantly pushing your brain and your body past what it thinks it's capable of. Because we all know, we've all heard the saying that we're capable of more than we think we are, but it is very, very true. We scratch the surface of our true potential, guys. The other thing is to think about your cortisol levels. So I did another video the other day around the 2 biggest needle movers that can elevate your testosterone level naturally, and they were to improve your sleep quantity and quality, which we've obviously talked about in depth here, but also to manage your cortisol levels, your stress hormone, right? And it goes without saying that we'd all love to be less stressed, but would we? Would we really? Because stress is actually an amazing thing, right up to the point it breaks us. And I actually think the relationship we have with stress needs to be adapted. We have something called it's called the CAR, which is called the cortisol awakening response. So every human being has this, and basically it's designed to wake you up. So when your alarm goes off in the morning, a lot of people feel that, well, whoa, what's going on? Like, I certainly feel that. And I used to think this was a weakness. I used to think that this sort of rising level of anxiety and stress first thing in the morning, I was like, bloody hell, I'm broken. What's wrong with me? And now I realize that actually it's a superpower. It wakes me up faster. It gets me in an alert state. It means that I can do stuff quicker. So my relationship with cortisol and with stress has changed and moved to the positive. Now I see it as this superpower. I'm like, wow, I feel, it makes me feel alive. That's one way of looking at it. So I think changing our relationship with stress and not wearing it necessarily as a badge of honor. I'm not saying that is a good thing. And you can be a busy idiot. We've all heard this, where you're like, oh, look at me. I responded to 50 emails today and I went to 9 Zoom calls. Brilliant. You talked to 9 people about the weather and you said kind regards 50 times. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, we know what the busy idiot stuff is. That's not peak performance. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about moving the needle, moving stuff forward, developing projects, becoming better versions of ourselves, right? That's peak performance. So I think accepting that you're always going to be stressed, more money, more problems, and adapting your relationship with it is going to really, really help you out here. But obviously, if you want to reduce your cortisol level in the acute, in the short term, one of the best places to look, or the biggest incident of distraction and elevating that cortisol level is your phone. Hopefully this video isn't stressing you out, but social media, unfortunately now, is kind of designed algorithmically to trigger you, to stress you out, to get you engaging and commenting and giving you dopamine and doom scrolling and all of this stuff. And, at a very low level, subconscious level, that's going to stress you out. You expose yourself to that for long enough, consistently, every single day, it's just going to raise your cortisol levels. The first thing that people do in the morning, what do most people do? They're in bed with their partner maybe. The first thing they do is check their phone. That's pretty messed up. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're addicted to these devices that really, they have the ability to serve us and move us forward as a civilization and make us better people. But for the vast majority of people, they're stressing us out and actually bringing us down to a lower level, the lower level of consciousness, a lower level of ability. And I don't think they're necessarily positive. So curate your relationship with your phone. I've done another video on that. Shock, I've done videos of bloody everything at this stage. But yeah, go and check that one out. So that, guys, there's plenty to get stuck into then. As I say, this is just very much what I would be looking at if I wanted to achieve peak performance for longer and more often. I think there's lots of needle movers there. We talked about sleep, exercise, carbohydrate timing, processed food, dietary fat, water, doing hard things, caffeine, alcohol, nicotine, your cortisol levels. But the real benefit, and the winners amongst you already know this, is it's not doing these in isolation once. It's stacking these things, doing them consistently, and allowing them to have the time and the patience to compound. Doing each of these things one by one day after the other, once, is going to make no difference. But if you can tick 5, 6, 7, 8 of the things that I've said today, and you do them consistently every day for 1 week, 2 weeks, 28 days, 4 weeks, you're going to get a lot more done. You're going to achieve more peak performance, more focus, concentration, better cognitive function, better mental health, less distraction. You will achieve peak performance more often and for longer. But that's the real benefit of this stuff, guys. It's not going, oh, well, I tried that. When? Oh, well, yesterday. Right, okay. Or maybe try it for 14 days in a row and then see how you feel. Anyway, I've taken up plenty of your time, guys. I hope this video has been very useful. This is the 118th day of me posting in a row on YouTube. And I'll be honest, if you haven't watched any of my videos, thank you very much for watching all the way to the end. I love and appreciate the support. I've really enjoyed the process. I won't be going anywhere. If you have enjoyed this one, like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment, let me know what you think of this and how you define peak performance. I am genuinely interested in having a constructive conversation about this sort of stuff. And until tomorrow, I'll see you then.